it.
31st chapter of the book of Yechezkel. We're in the midst of talking about Egypt. So the 11th year, the first day of the month. Okay, so this is the year, the first day of the third month. We're getting closer to the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. This is a month of Sivan, presumably is what we would call it today, counting the Torah for the first month of the year is Nisan, so it should be 586. Sivan, so just a couple of months, 2 months before the destruction of the temple, presumably. Ben Adam. Amor al Paro melech Mitzrayim vel hamono et mi damita bigod lecha. Tell Paro and his people, who was comparable to you in greatness? Who do you compare yourself to? Who do you think you're so great? And what's the answer? Hine Ashur. It's Assyria. Erez Balvanon, a cedar in Lebanon. Yefei anaf v'choresh meitzal ugvoa koma, ugeva koma, uvein avotim haita samarto. The beautiful cedar, right? Assyria. Beautiful branches, shady thicket, lofty stature with its top amongst the trees. And we've seen many times, right? Arzei halavonon, cedars of Lebanon, the great trees of the Middle East, certainly of the ancient world, and still very much today on the Lebanese flag. That's Egypt. You were great, like Assyria. Mayim gidluhu tahom rom mathu. Water nourished it. The deep made it grow tall, right? Its roots went deep into the ground. Edna haroteh holech svivot matavet te'alateha shilcha et kol atzei hasodeh. Washing it with its streams, right where it was planted, making its channels well up with water to all the trees of the field. Al kain gavha komato mikol atzei hasodeh. That's why it's taller than all the other trees of the field. Vatir bena sar afotav. Vate'erachna po rotav, mimayim rabim bishalcho. Its branches multiplied and then grew long because of all the water that it managed to lap up. Bisafotav kinenu kolof hashamayim v'tachat porotav yaldu kol chayat hasadeh v'tzilo yeshvu kol goyim rabim. Its branches nested all the birds of the sky and all the beasts of the field were under it. And in the shadow lived all of the great nations. So here, what's happening is that the Egypt, right, is asked, Paro's asked, and the Egypt's asked, and of course it's rhetorical, they're not really being asked, it's just this prophecy, who are you like? And we say, you're like Assyria. And in what way are you like Assyria? Assyria is a great nation, they're a great people, right? And emphasized or demonstrated by their great tree. And there is a similarity between Egypt and Assyria in contrast to Israel, which is important, which is Assyria and Egypt have lots of water, have rivers, and right, Egypt has lots of water. Egypt has the Nile. Egypt was always, there wasn't great famine in Egypt because they always had the Nile. Continuing in verse 7. It was beautiful in height, in its length of its branches, because its stock stood by abundant waters. Arazim lo amamuhu began Elohim broshim lo damu el seafotav the armonim lo hayu kiforotav kol eitz began Elohim lo dama elav biofio. Cedars in the garden of God could not compare with its cypresses, could not match its beauty. Plain trees, they're nothing like its branches. No tree in the garden of God was its peer in beauty. Just read one more verse and we'll talk a little bit about this. Yafeh asitiv berov daliotav vayikneuhu kol atzei eden asher began Elohim. I made it beautiful because of its tremendous, bushy branches, and all the trees of Eden envied it in the Garden of Eden. This is the second time, last number of chapters, where Yechezkel goes back towards the Garden of Eden. He talks about Tyre, this wealthy island, and compares it to that they thought they were like the Garden of Eden. It was perfection. Everything was beautiful and was all done by them. And here too, Egypt. Why do you think you're so great? Who are you like? You're like Assyria. And even like the Garden of Eden. How are they like the Garden of Eden? Well, they're full of water. Think of the way Garden of Eden is described as being water, right? The rivers all around it. And it was a place of harmony, in a sense, like verse 6, all the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field, right? It's like a place of true harmony. What happened to Assyria by this point? the Assyrians were defeated by the Babylonians. They are no longer, they were the great world power, right? They exiled the northern kingdom, but now Babylon has destroyed them. So what do you think is going to happen to Egypt? Lachei, we're in verse 10. Ko amar Adonai Elohim yan asher gavat b'koma v'yitain samarto el bein avotim v'ram levavo b'gavho, because you towered in stature and thrust it to the top of the leafy trees. It was arrogant in its height. And right, we don't know that there are great trees in Egypt, but think of pyramids and sphinxes, these huge statues and monuments that were built. Vetneu biad el goyim asu yaselo kirisho geirash tihu. I delivered it into the mightiest of nations, right? Assyria was delivered to the mightiest nations, and that's what's going to happen to you, Egypt. They treated it as befitted its wickedness, and I banished it. And think of the word geirash, right? That's what God does. He banishes Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. Vayichretuhu zarim aritzei goyim vayitshuhu el heharim uvechol gay ayot naflu dal yotav atishparna parotav bechol afikei haaretz v'yardu mitzilo kol amei haaretz vayitshuhu. Strangers from the nations cut it down and abandoned. Its branches fell to the earth. Right, all of a sudden, these beautiful Arzei Alavonon, the beautiful Assyrian, the dominant Assyrian Empire, it was cut down. It is no longer. It was destroyed. It's not going to stand anymore. It isn't standing anymore in any way, shape, or form like it was. And again, this is what's going to happen to you, Egypt. Verse 13, Al mapalto yishkenu kolof hashamayim val parotav hayu kol chayat hasadeh. Right, so upon its fallen trunk, all the birds of the sky nest, and all the beasts of the field lodge amongst its bushes. And right here in the beginning, we talked about how they were up there, almost gaining from. They were sitting in its the beasts underneath in its shade, the birds living and building their nests and eating from the trees. Now, what are they doing? Presumably, it's like they're eating at the carcass. The trees have all fallen to the floor. They're no longer, and whatever little ruins are left, the animals, for whatever reason, are destroying. That is, so think of it, the Assyrian Empire is being destroyed by, it's no longer everybody's gaining great wealth from it, but it's fallen, and every former little nothing is now taking advantage of it. And that's what's going to happen to Egypt. We're in 14. Right, no trees by water will again think that they're so great. Will not think of their how tall they are and how leafy they are because they're watered. Right, because what's happened to them? They were the highest. And now what happens to them at the end of the verse? They're given to death, to Eretz Tachtit, to the land underneath, to the netherworld. They're going down descending into the pit. You were at the heights, and now you're going down to the bottom. Right? We're in the middle of reading about the story of Yosef. Yosef's life is an up and down life. Right? He stands and everybody else is bowing to him. He's sold down to Egypt. He's down in the house of Potiphar. Then he goes back up. He gets to the top of Potiphar's house. Then he goes down into the pit. Then he's brought back up to Pharaoh, etc., etc. Right? So Yosef is up and down, up and down. Here we have these great kingdoms, Assyria and hint, Egypt, who were up and haughty and mighty and believed it, kind of like Yosef when he was a young man. But you will be sent down. Verse 15. Ko amar Adonai Elohim b'yom b'rito shola hevalti ki seiti alav et tahom ve'emnen harotav v'iklu mayim rabim v'akdir alav levonon v'chol atzei hasadeh alav ulfeh. God says on the day it went down to Sheol, to the netherworld or something, I closed the deep over it. I covered it. I held back its streams and great waters. I made Lebanon mourn deeply for it, and all the trees of the fields languished on its account. Right? It's not going to get out. It's locked. Deep where it can't come out. Mikol mapalto hirashti goyim b'horidi oto Sheol el yordei for v'inachamu be'eretz tachtit kol atzei Eden mifchar v'tov levanan kol shotei mai. I made nations quake at the crash of its fall when I threw it down there, when it descended into the pit. And all the trees of Eden, the best of Lebanon, all that were well watered, were now down in the netherworld. So obviously mythic images here. It's not talking only about trees. It's supposed to be talking about, the fighters, the army, the civilization of Assyria, where it was at the heights, and now it's so destroyed. It's nothing. Gamheim ito yardu sha'ola el chalei charev uzaro yashvu v'tzilo b'tochayim. They also descended with it into Sheol, to those slain by the sword, together with its supporters, who had lived under its shadow. And then we finish, El mi damita kacha, b'chavod uvegadol ba'atzei Eden. Now you know who is comparable to you in glory and greatness amongst the trees of Eden, right? You know who you're like, Paro. You know you're like Egypt, who was on so high, who was so great, who was so haughty, who was so mighty, who had always water and never terrible famines, and always had enough, and was able to lord other people. You were like the Assyrians, and it seemed like it was perfect. It seemed like it was the Garden of Eden, and everything was fine. It's not like Israel, where it depended upon the rain. And every other generation, we know from reading the books, right? Certainly, we know during the times of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef. We know it during the time of Eliyahu and Elisha and many others. There's constant famine. There's not enough rain. It's not like that in Assyria. It's not like that in Egypt. They're like Gan Eden. They're perfect. However, Eden el eretz tachtit betoch arelim tishkav et chalei cherev hu paro v'chol hamona neum Adonai Elohim. But you too will be brought down with the trees to the lowest part, right? The trees, again, symbolizing the top. We're at the top. You're going to go down. You'll lie amongst the uncircumcised. Talked about this. This is the second time, last number of chapters, Yechezkel insults the uncircumcised. Went back and thinking about in the book of Shmuel, book of Malachim, book of Shoftim, with Shimshon, with David, how those are really insults to the Philistines. You're uncircumcised, shows you're uncouth, and those slain by the sword. So shall be the fate of Paro and his hordes, declares God. And so this chapter, and this has been, one of the themes of the last number of chapters 12, is this sense of haughtiness, this sense of, that's one of the problems of these people. We see that there are a number of different problems of the nation that surrounded Israel. One of them was taking advantage when Bnei Israel were defeated by the Babylonians. And the second one is the haughtiness. Egypt is punished both because of their haughtiness, in similarity to Tsor, to Tyre, and lesser to Sidon, but also what we saw yesterday was that Egypt, and the last 2 days, I should say, Egypt was supposed to be there in alliance with Israel, and they were supposed to be strong. They were supposed to defend Israel, and that's not what they did. And so Egypt here, like these other nations, is going to be brought down. You thought that you're the Garden of Eden. Places that think that they're like the Garden of Eden oftentimes are destroyed. There's one more place, which is called Kigan Elohim, which is Sodom. Sodom was also a place that it's described in the Torah as being like the Garden of God. It was so green and it was so lovely. It's destroyed. It's decimated. And the same will happen to you, says Yechezkel. Egypt, just as happened to Sodom, and just has happened to Ashur, to Assyria.